We're going live, live. Hold on. I haven't even looked at myself.
Hey, 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 universe, world, Milky Way, Africa, South Africa. Welcome back to another installment of Out of Space. Today, as you can see in the background, we're cruising in Europe a little bit. There's a little bit of a landscape there of a vista of the oceans in Cyprus. And with us on this boat in the ocean with the sun right above us, today we've got the lovely Mokoto. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
That was. Thank you so much. That's so deep. That is so freaking deep. I don't think I've had an intro like that. Thank you. Thank you. Definitely. I mean, no, no need to cross over the ocean.
Nah, but
I'm
I
still.
think we've been locked in for so long. Just need a little bit of some scenery outside of our
No,
borders.
absolutely, absolutely no. But I'm still on a +27. Still on a +27 vibe. So
That's right. How's
it is
life?
what it is. But it's life is decent. I mean, it's obviously very uncertain times for everybody else. I think that's a common thread amongst all of us.
100%.
But very few of us have been able to transcend that uncertainty. So forever blessed, man. Forever blessed to still be able to survive, even during the uncertainty, and be a lot more palatable to what's going on, particularly in the digital world.
Mm.
So that's been interesting. That's been interesting. How
Yeah.
are you, by the way? It's so interesting how, like, even before we went to the session, I didn't really ask you how you're doing. So let me ask you, how are you doing? How's your mental health? How's your physical health? And how active have you been physically?
Physical health poor. Let's call that an E minus. No, no, it's not that
What
bad.
do you
I
mean you
mean,
had an E minus?
no, no, no. I'm just kidding. It's not that terrible.
Okay.
I am a
Because
little
you know
bit.
we can't be playing jokes like that. Like,
I'm. I know, I know, I know.
lots
No,
of
so I
time.
just mean in terms of being fit and consistent. That's really the realm
Mm.
I'm coming from. So I think I've been sneaking in exercise slowly because physical exercise because between September and October I plan
Mm.
on going on an intense regiment with my trainer digitally. So
Nice.
we're gonna look to knock between 5 to 10 Ks in that time, all
Mm.
because I'm prepping. I'm prepping, and that's also why I haven't cut my hair. I'm also prepping for a new musical project, which should be releasing
I, that's
in final
incredible.
quarter. Yeah, and
Nice.
I think
Nice.
I think specifically towards what you enjoy and what you're about. I'm pretty certain you're really going to enjoy the project because it's all Afrocentric, Afro
Mm.
Central. So
It's
yeah.
so interesting because, like, the last time when I was listening to your music and I kept telling you, like, you remind me of, like, a crossbreed of Masego, and just, like, really worldly alternative music. So your music reminds me a lot of my time in Cyprus. It has, like, the strong nostalgic feel of, like, beach bums and Bali, but beach bums and Bali on in a beautiful sense, in a beautiful Pan African global globetrotter sense.
Yeah.
So I can't wait, man.
I
I
think
can't wait.
I think the difference, and just talking to what you're speaking to, I think the difference between the first project and the second project is that the first
Mm.
project was more tiered to my experience at a particular time of my life as a human man. So I think the reason why
Mm.
you can say that it could really like transcend what was worldly rather is because it wasn't necessarily about who I am today as a person, as an African,
Mm.
as someone who studied abroad. It didn't necessarily detail
Ah.
that. It was spawned from an emotion that I was feeling at a particular time, and that was basically the whole
Mm-hmm.
thing. And what I felt and what I experienced, anybody in the whole world, regardless of culture, race, gender, they could go through it. So I think that's the emotion you felt.
Mm.
Whereas with this new project, it's full on Africa. It's
Oh
100%
yeah.
full on. It's full on
Oh, that's
Africa
incredible,
from
man.
first
That's
track to
that's that's
last.
incredible.
First track to
Really.
last.
What a
Yeah.
time. What a
Right.
time. What a time. What a time. What a time to be African. What a time to be African.
It's a beautiful time to be African.
It is.
I think we have an opportunity obviously outside of COVID, but even within COVID, there's an
Mm,
opportunity for Africans to exploit this time to express
mm,
ourselves in terms of who we were and who we are today, and
mm.
who we wish to continue to be moving forward. Because now we need to really it's
Absolutely.
a time to really define that. Because a lot of other
Mm,
cultures do have done it really well. They've defined themselves. They know who they are. They understand their cultures, and they practice it, even though it's become a
mm,
bit more modern. So it's our time to
mm,
really firmly do that in particular.
mm,
I believe.
mm,
Obviously, there's so many challenges because even last week, I don't know if it was on the show. It might have
mm-hmm,
been, but my friend who I had on the show last week, she explained to me that the what's really difficult about having one Africa is about it's not necessarily about us just coming together and doing things. It's about it's too deep. You know, it's infrastructure,
mm,
it's history,
mm,
it's
mm.
corruption, it's lack of identity,
Absolutely.
it's lack of the ability to even move across different countries easily.
Mm, mm,
It's so
mm,
complex. So I know it's not easy, but I think as Africans, each family, each person, we need to just do our part, try our thing, and then let's build.
mm.
Let's look at 50 years from now, and Africa in
I
50 years.
100%. It's so interesting because two things from what you've said have sort of come to the top of my mind, and one is gerrymandering, which I'll get back to later on. But right now is more the importance of being anchored in your Pan African backbone, but juxtaposing that with the importance of being a global citizen. So it's so weird what's going on now is I can see this particularly in the ITC sector, in the ICT sector, because I've just gone into 4IR full on and data science. And I've noticed like there's this weird concept that keeps coming up, and it's the anonymity of competence, where because we're now working a global ecosystem, being a black proud woman, black proud African woman doesn't not that it doesn't count, but when it comes to competence in a global ecosystem, that doesn't matter. Competence matters more. So it's fascinating to know that even though, we've got the uprising of the Black Lives Matter movement and Black lives really matter inside out, when it comes to economic mobility, nobody really cares who you are and what you stand for. Because there's so much not confidentiality, but there's just it's so closed. The competence sphere is really closed because, for example, if Microsoft doesn't care who you are, can you deliver? Can you drive analytics? Can you drive insights? Yeah, so navigating around that particular structure is very interesting. Um, and the second part I wanted to bring up was just the idea of gerrymandering. So I don't know if you know what gerrymandering is. It's a
Mm.
political term that refers to. Oh, so I don't know. I
Sounds
don't know
familiar.
the definition like by Oxford verbatim, but it just refers to the extent to which a continent is separated, right, according to how convenient it is to transfer resources.
Hmm.
So back in the time during slavery, you'd find a master who would say, you know what, I'm going to divide South Africa and Zimbabwe because it's just easier. And for feasibility reasons, transferring resources and stuff is a lot easier. But it's so fascinating how in gerrymandering we've engraved our personal identity so much where I'm Zimbo and I'm Zimbabwean to the core and I'm South African to the core, but I could easily be Zimbabwean, you know? Gerrymandering could take place right now. It's like, to what extent do these borders even matter? So it's weird. It's really weird that we're encouraged to be proud about where we come from, but we also don't know how far those parameters lie. South Africa could go as far as Zambia for all of I care.
Even the
What does
West,
that
the
mean to
Nguni
me?
migration. I mean the Bantu
Absolutely.
migration.
Even with 100%, with the Bantu migration as well, is so how engraved should I be in my Setswana roots if that migration goes beyond South Africa? So that's weird. It's weird that there's just this dichotomy between, or this presumed dichotomy between being a proud South African local ethnic woman versus being a global citizen.
Mm.
Yeah, man, fascinating times, eh?
Speaking of that,
Fascinating times.
It's Women's Month. I think
Mm,
speaking specifically to that, and something that someone reminded me of, and it's something I forgot, and I actually felt ashamed to forget. We're looking at being a
mm,
black woman today. uh,
Mm.
in terms of the education of where black women come from and what they are and what they stand for. Someone reminded
Mm.
me that that patriarchy is a Western concept or construct, because
Hmm.
they were specifically stipulating that in some cultures, if you're going to use those terminology, a lot of cultures back in the day there was actually a matriarchy. And
Mm.
so there's
Mm.
this idea that patriarchy comes back, originates back to our ancestors' time, but that's not necessarily
Mm.
true. It's just what's
Mm.
kind of written is what's been laid, and we have to also question the
Mm.
authors around that. And if we look at that, if we
Absolutely.
talk to how there was matriarchy in African history, and we look at what's happening now to our sisters across the globe, even in South
Mm.
Africa it's bad enough, but across the globe, it is sad
Mm.
that I think the idea of what an African is might even be corrupted to where we are today.
Absolutely. I 100%. There's a very controversial saying that says the winner is always the person who's had the ability to document that history.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I found very controversial conversations with psychologists when I was in Cyprus. And one of my professors said, the thing that we don't know about the devil, the problem with the devil is that we don't know his side of the story. And I know it sounds so extreme, but it just goes to show that a lot of the time, the victor is the individual who's had the ability to write that history. And it's so sad that a lot of our history has been eroded to the point where we don't even know the role of patriarchy and the role of matriarchy as well. I mean, I think there's a Kenyan society, there's some sort of, I think it's a Kenyan, some society in Kenya that it's actually a village with only women. So only women are allowed in that village, and it's run by women. Resources are distributed by women as well. Absolutely fascinating. The power of a black woman is just above and beyond. But maybe taking it down to South Africa. We have a real crisis of masculinity. Like that's not even open for debate. The psychopathology of the South African man is about 1.5 standard deviations up. So when you talk about standard deviations, you just talk about aggressive behavior on a pendulum or even on a spectrum. And South African men are slightly higher, not even slightly higher. I think a standard deviation and a half is way, way more than it should be. And I don't think it's so much an issue with aggression. It's not aggression that's the issue. It's the way that aggression is expelled.
Hmm.
So aggression is always going to be at the core of any man. And I would be very scared to be with a man who's not aggressive. Aggression can be a beautiful thing. It's just a matter of how it's redirected,
Hmm.
whether it be in the form of going to the gym, whether it be in the form of being part of some sort of sorority group. So, for example, brotherhoods are very important. And I've noticed South African men don't have as strong brotherhood groups and social capital to tap into.
Mm.
So that sense of belonging has really been eroded. And also just the role of empowerment. So empowerment, women empowerment is a very tricky concept. And I 100% stand for the empowerment of women, particularly black women. But you also can't dichotomize empowerment, right? So empowerment, it's sad because the empowerment of one variable will always be at the detriment of another, right? But it's important to ensure that you put in the certain social and economic systems that make sure that transition is seamless. But it's just unfortunate that even our transition between pre and post democracy, the black man has always been denigrated. Being a black man has always been a violation of moral and ethical code. And it's unfortunate that even during that particular transition, I don't know if black men were ever given a space to move out of that denigration.
Mm.
So it's like, it's complicated, and it's weird because I can't even have this conversation on a public domain because one, half the time I'm not engaging with critical thinkers. And it's important because in order to be a critical thinker, you've got to have a palate for controversial information. So the
True.
moment I talk about the crisis of masculinity, like, you're not about black women, you're not about black empowerment, you're not about women,
Yeah,
and that's not the case. It's like I'm 100% for it, but we've got to be so
it's
sensitive
probably the
with
opposite. Not even probably, it is the opposite. But the problem is
But
people don't like to digest the hard truths. I think the truth is a hard pill to swallow. You know, we talk about bringing
it
out
is.
old idioms. It's a really hard pill to swallow because I think the other part about swallowing the truth is that the truth has the ability to eject or reject
Mm.
the reality that you've had, the faith and
Oh,
belief that you've had,
100%.
and human beings go into crisis mode or cannot
Mm.
fathom everything that they've believed and everything that they've done to be incorrect.
Mm.
You know,
Absolutely. It's
it's
like
unfathomable.
anything that goes, absolutely, anything that goes against your belief system will cause so much dissonance. And the problem is, in that dissonance, we need to replace it with something else.
Mm,
And the best way to replace it is by saying, oh, no, she does not believe in the empowerment of women. I 100% do. But I also believe in the sustainable empowerment of women, you know? How do we include men in the conversation? How do we have more he is for she conversations as well? How do we give men a voice? And even with gender-based violence as well, and it's so rampant. It's so rampant, it's not funny. And it's a topic I don't necessarily shy away from, but I always say it's a topic that I would love to have with men.
hmm
So when people ask, so when I have conversations with men about gender-based violence, the first thing I say is, if you were to see me being abused on the sidewalk, what would you do? And I find that a lot of South African men don't know how to answer that. You
mm,
know, our conversations are at such a macroeconomic or macro socio level, and not so much at an individual level. Like if I were to come tell you now that there's just this homie man, I love this man. He's giving me everything I want, but he's abusing me. What would your response be? And there's just so much hesitance and resistance to answering that. And that for me is the answer. Is I don't think our South African men are even willing to have that conversation. I'd really appreciate your thoughts. I don't know what you think about it. So, of course, we know that gender-based violence is it's such a saddening and sickening concept. But I don't know if we should be having nuanced conversations. Do you think there is any part of the conversation that we're not including from the men's side?
So my opinion of it. So for first and foremost, when I look at what I believe and what I understand about gender-based violence,
Mm,
I think it's a tough reality to understand that for men to understand that even if I am not abusing a woman, even if I'm not harassing a woman, even if I'm at home doing great things by myself, going to work, not
mm-hmm,
bothering anybody, I can still be part of the problem. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is that the truth needs to be uncovered around what it actually means to have for gender-based violence to occur. People believe that the only way that gender-based violence exists is if you are the perpetrator who is directly attacking a woman or harassing a woman. But the
mm-hmm,
reality is that it's not
mm-hmm,
just that. So for me, for the longest time, it was always like, I'm not that guy. Not all men are trash. Not me.
mm,
Because I don't
yeah.
do those things. But I mean, I can give you an example. Bringing back to the question that you'd like to ask South African men. You say I remember a time in I don't know if I was in high school, illegally drinking, or if it was just after we turned 18. There was a period, it was somewhere there, where in Hatfield, when it was
Mm,
still a student village, for the parties.
mm.
I remember.
So it's so weird because I've never been to Hatfield in my life.
I'm
I know that's so embarrassing,
well, no. I
but
mean,
yeah.
you should have the opportunity to go, but they've removed it from society. So unfortunately,
Have they?
yeah, it doesn't
In what
exist.
sense?
In terms of
What do you mean it doesn't
in
exist?
terms of the clubs that were
Oh,
there
fair enough.
and how it was
Fair
like
enough.
Long Street esque, but different.
Mm,
So I remember a time
mm,
when there was a club. I believe it was Stones and Zanzibar. So you'd have to there was an underground parking esque situation. So you could walk up you have
mm,
to walk up the steps to get to the clubs. So when we were going through the park, because it was also like parking at the back, so you could go through the underground parking to get to the other side,
mm,
basically. So I remember there was a time where there was a woman and a man who were involved in a physical altercation with each other.
mm.
Don't know what the story is, don't know the context, but they were attacking
Yeah.
each other.
Mm,
And I even think I can't remember the exact extent because I remember they were attacking each other, and I think maybe the woman got in the car, the man jumped on the car or something. I can't remember, but the point of the
Oh,
story,
wow.
it was intense because in that moment we were like,
Mm,
oh shit, oh my god,
yeah,
whoa, whoa, whoa,
yeah.
but we weren't doing anything about it. You get what
Mm,
I mean? So I look back at
yeah.
that as an example. There was inaction. To be fair, at the
Mm,
time, I think there was a lack of maturity and understanding, but still, that resides in many
absolutely.
men, even after they've matured a little bit. I think
Mm, yeah.
there's this fear. Like if I have to ask myself, what did I feel in that situation? Although I
Mm,
laughed, there was a
mm,
fear that I felt that, man, if I get involved, my life is in danger.
mm.
So I prioritized
Absolutely.
my own.
And those are real variables, by the way. I don't want us to ignore. I love talking. So I call them extraneous variables. Those are variables that might interfere in helping behavior. There is a study, and I know like you did not want this conversation to be like all academic and formal, but
No,
I'll
no.
quickly spit it out. There's a study called the Good Samaritan, and it's a study that I gone through during my A levels, and it just looked at helping behavior within a public setting and what might hinder people from engaging in helping behavior. So if they were to see a couple that's being abused or a man that's been beaten up in the street,
Hmm.
what would propel you to help and intervene and engage, and what would prevent you, right? And one of the biggest prohibitors was alcohol. So
Okay.
I understand that in a club setting, like when you see a couple getting into a fight, you're probably thinking, oh, but they're probably just drunk, right? They're
Mm.
probably just out of it. Is to what extent, how do you gauge and measure whether something is real danger, and real danger to the individual versus real danger to yourself? So there's so many variables that you have to go through before you intervene. Um, and I fully acknowledge those. I wish those would even be part of the conversation to gender-based violence. When is it appropriate? Most of the time, it should be appropriate at any point in time to intervene.
Mm.
But we still should have nuanced conversations, because if you don't have these nuanced conversations, then we're not going to address the nuanced prohibitors of intervention as well. Like you've mentioned that your safety, you put your safety at hand as well. And that's important. There have been crazy, man. There was a story one time in Cyprus where this girl was being dragged out of the club. And mind you, Cyprus is the safest
Wow.
island ever. Like, I think the crime rate, so when I went in 2014, the crime rate was at about 2%. It's probably at about an odd 4% or so, but crime is literally non existent. But the problem is with the influx of the international culture and different people, of course, there'll be an amount of social discord. So there was this African girl who was leaving a club, and she was being dragged by these other African guys into a car.
South African guys.
And so the thing is, I don't know if I should mention nationality because I don't know how appropriate it is. But anyway,
Okay.
she was a Zimbabwean girl,
Mm-hmm.
but she was a Zimbabwean girl, and she was being dragged into a car by Nigerian guys. So another ordinary Nigerian guy sees this happening, right? And he goes into the situation to intervene because he's like, what the hell? You know that this girl's drunk and out of her mind. She doesn't know what the hell's going on. So as he's trying to intervene, the story, to the best of my knowledge, was this guy then got dragged into the car as well. So it's both the innocent guy, right, the good Samaritan going into the car with this girl who's literally knocked out unconscious. They went out to a villa in the middle of nowhere, raped the girl, beat up the guy to a pulp, and I think he was thrown across a balcony and he died.
Holy
This is an individual
smokes.
who, I'm telling you. So he died. I think this was an odd 4 years ago. So he died for intervening, and that was a cost. It cost him his life. So I understand those confounding variables you're helping is you're looking out for your life. One, two, I've also heard a lot from South African men that they don't know how to intervene when they know that these people are going to get back together.
Mm.
So it puts one in a very uncomfortable situation. But it doesn't take away from the fact that gender-based violence is just above and beyond sickening, and even with these
Shouldn't
small little
exist.
exceptions. it shouldn't exist at all. Even with these small exceptions, I mean, they only account for about less than 10% of the overall cases.
Mm.
So yeah, it's just what do we do from here? What do we do from here? But I always say it's more of a male conversation than it is women.
100%,
Um,
100%. Because there's a re-education that needs. For me, it's all about education. So there is a
mm,
re-education around, why. First and foremost, the question you ask is why would a man do that to a woman? I mean,
mm.
we could
And
break
you
it
know
down.
what?
Yeah.
So I even take it up a notch, and I say, why would a human do that to another human?
Mm.
Because if we don't have a human to human conversation, we're never going to solve the gender based conversation. And it's fascinating. Like when I do a lot of research, like I've got to ask myself very uncomfortable questions, and I've asked myself this uncomfortable question: that if a man beats up a woman, does that automatically qualify as gender based violence? And how come? So it's I've got to be careful with how I put it as
I
well,
follow.
and how I parallel it to if a white man were to beat up a black man, would we call that a racial altercation or race based altercation? And the only reason why I ask those questions is in order for me to understand the psychopathology at a human level. Is what causes this person to engage in aggressive behavior? Is there some sort of displacement? So displacement takes place when you've experienced aggression, some sort of aggression, passive or physical aggression from somebody who is of a higher, either stronger than you, and then you try, because you're not able to face that person, you obviously exert that aggression towards somebody who's weaker than you. And that's the basis of gender-based violence is men just can't face models that are strong as them, so they've got to release that outlet onto a much weaker stimuli. And the only reason why I can even get to that is by understanding aggression at a human level.
Mm.
So just going back to gender-based violence, we need to understand what drives a human being to hurt another human being. One, what drives a human being to hurt a human being who is of a weaker stimuli than they are. And the moment we can tackle that, I really think we can start answering the conundrum around gender-based violence.
Ironically, so this is very unscientific. I've always said to people, I have this belief
Mm,
that if we look at it like criminals, and by criminals in this specific context, I'm talking about people who commit murder,
mm,
or who attacked acts of violence, just in general, but
mm,
specifically towards the murder side. I've always said to people, I find it odd that a sane, rational human being can
mm,
rationally take the life of another. And I said, how do you break that
mm,
down? And I always said that for me, right? When I dive deep into my own consciousness, it's almost like,
mm.
and I'd love to use an anime as an analogy, but I
Oh,
can't
it's
come up with
such a
one.
pity I don't watch anime, and you're gonna hate me for it. I'm
No, no, no,
sorry.
no, no, no worries. But I can't even think of one. But I'm just thinking of an anime context. So
Mm,
when I deep dive into myself in my own consciousness,
mm,
I see not silver, but the first color that came to my mind is silver. I see the silver
mm,
line of consciousness, where it's like a
mm,
thin membrane of, even if I put my weight on this membrane, it'll still
mm,
hold, and it's meant to hold
mm,
my current load. So my sanity, what I believe is right, what I believe is wrong. It's all held by this thin membrane. But I feel like
mm,
the moment you pierce the membrane and you cross over and it breaks, it's like when you break a membrane in you, it doesn't necessarily repair. Maybe it heals, but it's never the same. The potency of that
mm,
membrane has decreased significantly. So for me, it's almost like a snap. It's like if someone is capable of murdering somebody else, for example. For me, I see that as someone who has crossed and broken that membrane of consciousness. Because I was trying to understand
mm,
how do you see that as right? Obviously, it goes deeper because there's you can go into the psyche of someone who will kill another person. But I just mean now how I kind of look at it and how I kind of break it down is that there's this silver light of consciousness in every single person. It'd be like once you cross a
mm,
specific part, like punching a woman,
mm,
for example. You can never, do you really ever come back from that? Because you've now
mm,
pierced that
mm,
membrane that was once solid and and
mm,
unbreached, and now all of a sudden you've
hmm.
crossed upon that. So that's kind of the way that I've used to kind of derive a lot of these things in my life to make sense of how and why somebody would do that. I'm sure that it's a kind of mixed. I'm sure you've
Wow.
come across this in some extent, to some extent.
I mean, absolutely. But it's interesting that even with you calling it an irony, it's like there's an irony under the irony, right? Where you're assuming that in order for somebody to commit a malicious act or engage in maladaptive behavior, they would have crossed that membrane. But I don't know, and I'd love to challenge you. Like, is there any part of you that believes that all of us are more than capable of killing a human being? More than capable. Every single one of us. We have the capacity to engage in evil like we would not believe.
I believe that every human being, and this is the reality I've come across as I've gotten older. I believe
Mm.
every human being is capable of extreme evil.
Mm.
Every human
Do,
being.
do you do you appreciate that there is beauty in acknowledging that? And when I mean acknowledging that, like I mean acknowledging that at a deep level to say, I am Makhozo and I know that I'm a phenomenal human being, but I also have the capacity to engage in the deepest of malevolence and evil.
100%. There is.
So,
There is a beauty in that. I think
mm,
why, so I mentioned that the older I've gotten,
mm,
that reality's become more apparent to me,
mm,
or
mm,
transparent or clear to me rather. So for me, I had to realize because I always believed when I was young. I honestly believed I was a good child, good heart, well mannered. I
mm,
treated everybody with as much respect as I could. I tried to involve people as much as
mm,
I can. Then the older I got, ironically, the more I started to hurt people, and it baffled me.
mm.
I was like, how is it that a person who
How does that
how does it
happen?
happen? I do my best to be
Yeah.
good. I do my best to think of people. I do my best to consider others. I do
Mm,
my best to be good in general, in the whole
mm,
holistically, essentially. But yet, I've hurt so many people on the way. So then I had to come and I
mm,
had to really dumb it down and be like, but what is different about me compared to the person next door? At a fundamental level, we are both human. Fundamentally, if I
mm,
take a gun and I aim and shoot, fundamentally, I've committed a malicious act, despite the
mhm,
intention behind it. The act is what has happened. So I had to
mm,
realize that, man, I need to understand that as a human, I'm capable of the most evil. I mean, I could be
mm.
easily, you know me as a swell guy, in 20 years, I could be Hitler. That's a reality. I mean, I doubt that'll happen, and that's not where I'm trying to go. But I'm just saying that fundamentally,
Mm,
I understand that if something happens in my life, that could be who I become, you know, and that
absolutely. I
allows
mean,
me to ground myself.
mm.
Mm,
You've mentioned something so important there, and a key word is ground yourself. Is there's a saying by Jordan Peterson. I don't know it verbatim, but he said something along the lines of, "The more we anchor ourselves in evil, is the more we realize our potential um, to engage in perpetual good."
mm,
And it really speaks to the importance of knowing ourselves holistically, you know,
100%.
to revisit where we are, to revisit our darkest spaces. And that helps us to be the best human beings possible. And I'll tell you why, like in the face of adversity or in the face of temptation, because we've now already explored those domains, you
Mm.
know, we don't get shocked. Um, we don't get shocked at all. And this is why religious people struggle so much with dealing with the cognitive dissonance because you think you're the greatest thing that's ever happened. You know, like you're not about to drink, you're not about to go to the club, you're not about to do whatever. And it's so fascinating because I remember doing my undergraduate thesis on cognitive dissonance and sexual regret among African students in Cyprus. Yo, was it a thesis and a half? And I'd found that, I mean, among all the mess that I uncovered, I'd found that the religious students, when it came to sexual activity,
Hmm.
they were more likely to get STDs, more likely to fall pregnant, because they were so caught up in this moral psyche that they didn't engage in sexual preparedness. So, for example, a casual woman will go in and go, listen, I've got to have my pack of condoms. I've got to have my morning after pill. I've got to have protection. I know it might go down, so let me prepare myself, right? And they're more likely to be future-proofed against the consequences of unprotected casual sex than somebody who is really religious to say, no, God is with me. I will not fall for this guy. Sorry, this is my lamp.
No.
I will not fall for this guy. No, that will not happen, And then you find yourself in a very uncomfortable position. And because you've not thought about the roots of your temptation and the roots of your malevolence, you're not then able to prepare yourself going forward. It's so weird because we use this in business as well. We use this in data analyses where we look at predictors of human behavior and we look at predictors of business failure, and we're able to prepare in advance. And it's like, I just wish we could apply that to daily life. I also wanted to share how it is I came across the importance of understanding that I'm very capable of engaging in evil like any other person. So when was I part of the Presence Award? I think I was like 17 going on 18, and I was doing my A-levels in South Africa. So I took part in this program called the Presence Award program. In the UK, it's known as the Duke of Edinburgh program. And I had to engage so I had to take on a skill. So that fell under skills development, physical recreation. I had to take a sport for about 2 years. And then there was community service, but it wasn't your regular soup kitchen community service. No. It was community service going into high maximum security prisons in Mpumalanga at the time. And we had a group from the Netherlands, so some girls from the Netherlands who joined us, and we had to go into maximum security for a couple of weeks and engage with some of the rehabilitated prisoners. But rehabilitation is really weird, right? Because it takes place at various levels. And we had to go in there being very non-discriminative. So you would have a maximum security serial killer being rehabilitated and being accepted into the program. And we were not forced, but, we were empowered to encourage them, to interact with them, to speak to them, have a full-on conversation. So they paired us with different, man, it was so crazy. They paired us with different prisoners. And at the time, I knew, I was like, you know what? We're in maximum security. Of course, everybody definitely killed more than 2 people. I don't know how many people you have to kill to be tagged a serial killer. I think it's just over 3.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because in that interaction, is it 3 or 5?
I think I'm asking.
So as we went in, right, we were obviously briefed beforehand, but we were not told about who had committed what. And that was obviously for standardization purposes and just to eliminate the bias. But when I got to know my particular partner, so the prisoner that I was paired with, I realized how much of a human being he was. There was nothing about him that said serial killer. There was nothing about him that looked dodgy or weird or malevolent or dangerous. He was an ordinary human being who was trying to figure out Chris Brown's latest album. Chris Brown, Joe. What's that release, Joe? And I'm there, having the time of my life with this individual. And the only time I got to know what he committed was obviously upon departure when I'd left the prison program. But it's these prisons cooked for us. We did the garden with them. We engaged in mentorship programs with them. We really got to connect and know them outside of their sentencing. And they also weren't allowed to discuss their sentencing or any legalities with us.
Understandable.
And it's when I left that place, I remember driving back home. I just started driving and I was in my new little car and I was driving back home. No, I wasn't driving. I was actually driving to my boyfriend at the time. And I was crying. I cried from Mpumalanga all the way to Johannesburg, trying to figure out what the hell it was I just experienced, how somebody at the epitome of evil can be a normal human being just like me, And I think part of what made me cry was and break down like that was knowing that one, had the capability to do that. I was just never put in a dark enough space to even think of it, And it really spoke to the nature versus nurture debate that as much as there might be the nature part of it, where people assume that some people are more genetically predispositioned to engage in evil. It's like, if you're put in a dark space, if your environment is not conducive enough, you're going to turn into absolutely anything. And that really,
what then?
100%, and 100%, and it really set the tone for me, understanding anyone and everyone. I'm not taken. I'm not taken, and I always say, man, if I can chill with a serial killer for a couple of weeks, who are you? Who are you? Small boy, I beg, get out of my house,
Yeah.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. So that was an experience. I don't know. Have you ever met like dodgy people in your life? Have you ever found yourself having to overcome the dissonance?
I don't know. I think, I mean, I've met people who've been to jail, maybe not necessarily for serious crimes, but I think the biggest reality I had to challenge myself internally or mentally, just like inside, and it wasn't that intense, but it was my experience with African Americans, specifically African American males, and going to the hood and then seeing how people view it, but what happens in the hood, and it's quite a sad thing to see. And I don't want African Americans to think, oh, this African came here, looked at us, and said we were sad. No, but I do believe that we're not perfect either as Black Africans. But I think what I can see from African Americans that I saw there generally was that I don't want to put a blanket approach. 'Cause obviously, there are many different, but where I was and the people that I met, I just saw a lack of identity and an identity crisis just in general. And I just feel like they were dispositioned in terms of, it just feels like they don't belong, but they're there. So they're there to survive. It's kind of like you're born and you're raised and you're going to survive, and that's the life you have to live. You're a young Black African American man, even though they prefer Black American, who has to survive in this white or Caucasian country. In terms of them being the majority. So seeing that made me sad because I think in many ways, maybe they've conquered a few things that we haven't. But what I saw within them, what is missing that I felt like I had more. I was like, man, I just want them to come home because I just feel like they shouldn't be there. Not that America's not a nice place, or it can be. Like, it is, and they can make it there, and that's their home, so they should if they want to. But I just feel like I just wanted to wrap myself around them and be like, you're my brother, no matter where you're from, just come home if you need to. And that was crazy. But obviously, I'm not diving deep into the perplexities. It's quite deep in terms of what they're living every day and what they experience. But I mean, when I saw that for me was a reality. I had to adjust myself. So back to your question around having many dodgy people. Not to say that African Americans are not dodgy, but I'm just saying that going to the hood where people had this. Oh my gosh, you can't go to East St. Louis, Neo.
I
East St.
know.
Louis is the murder capital of the states. If you go there, you're gonna get shot, stabbed. You're going there. I can't
Absolutely.
believe it. And I had the time of my
Yeah.
life. I had the
Yeah.
time of my life going there. But I think just watching time. What I really wanted to, before we go into Africa, what I really wanted you to maybe just expand upon what we briefly spoke to was about tying into looking at what Black people and human beings go through in general as well. Maybe depression. We were talking about the neuropaths and the psyche, about what happens with people who go and experience depression. I think women also go through depression. I mean, first and foremost, everyone goes through depression, but now I just want to talk to
Not
maybe what
everybody does.
everybody goes through it, but maybe just if you could speak to what you've experienced, what you've studied around depression, and maybe also funnel it
Wow.
down to depression in women as well.
Sure. So fascinating. And it's so interesting that when you talk to me, you ask me to relate it to women. And it's interesting because I'll share where I am with my dissonance just around the identity and my struggles with just coming to terms with being a woman in South Africa for that matter. That okay, so let's start with depression. So first of all, depression is like fucking real. It's no joke. Depression it's no joke. And so what I find interesting is how people think in order for you to have depression, you must have had a traumatic experience. And it's like depression doesn't work like that, right? Then that's called PTSD. That's different. The core, like the DSM-1 core of depression is experiencing malevolence when everything around you is okay, but you still experience malevolence. So Jordan Peterson would always say, I don't understand why you guys say a woman who's been molested is depressed. She's not depressed. She's experiencing real feelings of trauma and sadness. That's not depression. That's a natural response to a traumatic event. Depression is not a natural response to a normal event. Depression is the inability to go out of melancholy, where it's just a positive feedback loop. And when I mean positive, I don't mean positive in an affect way. I mean positive in terms of the direction that it takes. So no matter what happens, no matter what the intervention is, you can have the resources, you can have the support, but there's just this weird feedback loop that keeps taking place where you think nothing matters, you don't know what it is. And what makes it worse is depression in and of itself is bad, but God forbid you have both depression and anxiety. Because the depression is not wanting to wake up. The anxiety is wanting to wake up so badly, but you actually can't. So that's very interesting. I mean, I experienced depression when did I experience like bouts of depression, but the most real experience for me was when I went to Cameroon, right? So I'd worked for the Turkish Ministry of Higher Education, and I was responsible for policy development in West Africa. And as we were talking just before our session, was the Ambazonia War that was taking place in Cameroon. Just not only seeing dead bodies, I mean, seeing dead bodies wasn't even as much of a fear for me. I think what really traumatized me was knowing that I was having conversation with amazing students who were so desperate to go overseas, right? And hosting scholarship exams. So we would go into high schools, encourage students to study abroad, introduce them to just what education in the diaspora is like, right? And we'd go to different cities, and there'd be one time when I'd go into a particular school, speak to the students, we'd run our workshops there, and I swear to God, like a week later, we'd get a call that school was bombed, and that half the students that I'd interacted with were like gone, dead, decapitated, beheaded, gone like you would not believe. And I remember having off the face of the earth, and I remember having to make very tough decisions and just pleading with the university to accept some of these students, regardless of what their results were on the scholarship exams, and there were definitely parts where there were breaches of moral and ethical code that I had to take in order to make sure that these kids survived, whether it would have been taking a child who'd failed that scholarship test and giving them an acceptance letter just to get them out of there. There were crazy decisions I had to make in that regard. And I remember going back to Cyprus, and my partner at the time was just so supportive. When I mean depression, so I don't know what level of depression people have experienced, but I've experienced depression where I've even been unable to wake up and take a bath, like take a basic bath, like normal water, shower was like physically impossible. And like now with my partner at the time, like bless his heart, he would throw me in his jacuzzi at the time and bathe me. I mean, bathe my ass, not bathe me like, no, it's going to be okay. Like rub my body, rub me like a little baby. Would literally bathe me, cook for me, feed me at that level. Yo, man, those were pretty dark times, and it's interesting because with with the depressive episodes that I've experienced, it's always been depression at a personal level, but had nothing to do with my career. So my career would like skyrocket. I'd be doing so well in the career, but on a personal level, um, my psyche would be so eroded. And what made it worse was that people didn't believe me. You know, they'd be like, "But you're doing so well. You got everything going for you. You know, why are you being so ungrateful? You're the only black woman in that position. Why?" You know, and I found myself trying to hang on to a thread. Um, Gosh, in the deep ocean. So depression is a very real thing. How I've tried to deal with it is going to the gym. So the thing about depression is obviously there is the option of taking antidepressants and stuff like that. I've taken antidepressants. I've been on benzodiazepines, hated them. Only took them for about 2 weeks, and I was like, that will never ever happen in my life. Because the problem is, like, benzodiazepines really affect my neurotransmitters. Like, my affect levels go, like, I literally flatline, you know. The thing about antidepressants is they take away your ability to live in the moment, and I really don't like that. I love being able to experience whatever it is, whether it's pain or discomfort. I don't mind, but I need to be able to transcend that pain. And the best way that I've been able to transcend that pain was by going to the gym. I've tried everything else, tried psychedelics, tried to weed, haven't tried DMT. Do you know DMT?
I don't.
Okay. So DMT is like your mushrooms, like really heavy
Okay.
psychedelic.
Okay, yeah.
It's I don't know. I don't think it's a mushroom. I think it's just an ayahuasca plant. But like that's on another level of psychedelic. So I've been very fascinated by psychopharmacology and just looking at how psychedelics influence mental health as well. But yeah, I've never gone that far, only because we have a history of mental illness that's induced by drugs. So I've been very careful not to play with anything, to be honest. But yeah, my ability to transcend depression has really been through gym, man. It's like, guys, like physical activity is so important. On a structural level, like it really rewires your neural connections. You know, you prune those depressive connections because depression is such a brain. There are physical structures in your brain that are able to catalyze depressive thoughts. And the only way to prune those off and to kill them is not the only way, but one of the most effective ways is through exercise. So yeah, that's the reason why I go to gym. I don't care about how I look, or okay, fair enough, to varying degrees, to appropriate levels. Um, I I love food. I love food a lot, but the most important thing for me is my mental health. Is my mental health. So depression among women. It's so interesting you bring that up, because my relationship with also being a woman is a bit different, in that I've been raised by a very strong cohort of men growing up. You know, had an amazing father growing up, amazing uncles, have amazing male mentors now. And I've always believed in progressive patriarchy. Like, I've never had a problem with patriarchy, but I've had to acknowledge that I come from a place of privilege in that regard, right? Is patriarchy can be very regressive in that regard. But I noticed, even though I had such strong support from men, I also realized that there was a part of my femininity that I don't think I explored to the fullest, to the point where it's only manifesting now during Women's Month, right? Where I've been interacting with a lot of women, and like, now women are so female, like they're so feminine, you know. And I'm like, yeah, like I don't think I'm that girl, you know. Yes, I'll put on makeup like on a random Thursday or Friday when I have the time, and yes, I'll put on a weave and here and that, but it's like at the core, I don't know how much of a woman I am. That's weird, and I'm only sharing that with you because it crossed my mind during Women's Month. So I haven't had an opportunity to really be part of female-led societies. I think I only have like 2 female friends. Everybody else is just like a male. So it's affected my research as well.
I
If you look at
see.
my passion domains, I focus on the crisis of masculinity. It's like I know women are amazing, but I'm more passionate about the male brain than I am the female brain. Gosh, I can't imagine how complex the female brain is, but there's power in being a woman. And I think what I appreciate about women and their experience with depression is that one, they've got lower rates of suicide, which is great because it means that the suicide attempts are more a cry for help than they are the need to end their life completely. So I appreciate the female ability to be vulnerable and seek help. So we have higher seeking, behavior seeking, seeking behavior, which is great, which is amazing. In terms of social structures, I think women could do so much better if we tap a lot into our social capital and would be a lot more supportive. Um, because I don't know, like since coming back home, I've noticed black women really struggle with tapping into the social capital of other black women. And it's
Mm-hmm.
because it's a resource thing. Everybody's really trying to win. So it's very difficult to find a black woman who is truly, truly for you. Um, if she's for you, sometimes she'll be for you for as long as you don't tap into her ecosystem.
Yes,
For as long as
yes.
you don't, you don't intimidate her. The moment it gets to her little shrine, it's a little bit of a problem. It's a little bit of a problem. And I've noticed that to be a real problem. But I think what helps me is also being in an industry that demands of a particular skill or of high skill. So being in the ICT sector, so that's also male dominated. But it doesn't take away from the importance of women to be able to transcend that, transcend insecurities, open up that space as well, and to also have men being a lot more progressive and like white folk as well, man. Like I'm tired of being the only black woman in a particular space, and then you have another black woman come in, and then white people go, "Hey, but did you see Tando? Hey, but Tando's
Ah,
new, and Tando's
ah,
another black girl." It's like it's beautiful that she's another black woman.
but
Yeah, you know what I mean. But so like that's it's very interesting, very interesting,
and then
very
and then
interesting.
maybe
Gosh.
maybe because we like you actually said it before, we could talk for hours. But maybe in conclusion, what
Mm,
I really wanted to discuss with you about is,
mm.
on average, you've traveled Africa quite extensively. What has been
Not
your
at all.
Well, okay, maybe not extensive, but you've traveled more than most in Africa. So just from in terms of where
Mm,
you've been, also having lived in South Africa, um, and being a South African, um,
mm.
what has been your observation? What have you loved? What have you hate? When the South African watches this show, I also want them to kind of get some knowledge around some nuggets around the rest of our neighbors. Like what has been your experience? What have you really
Mm,
loved? What have you really hated? You know, if we could just
mm.
yeah, if we could maybe just go through that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. It's such a that's a lot. That's a lot to think about. First of all, South Africa, man, please, please, please put money. It's killing me. What is it for South African men and not understanding the dynamic of taking care of a So I don't even know where to start. As you can see, like I'm so speechless. I'm like, how was that even? You not even take a girl. You not buy her. No, 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 no. My local boys.
There's a video
And
my
it's like
girlfriend has
what?
sent me before. Did you pay for the honey?
I Yes, yes, yes. It's such a pity. It's such a pity. We're like going towards the end because I really wanted to ask you. I mean, how have you navigated around that, and hmm, how economically fluid do you think a man should be in a relationship? Do you believe in taking care of your girl? Do you believe in like
Let,
what?
yeah, let me start before you go. Let me start. Let me answer that question.
Yes.
So, I believe in practicality and building towards prosperity. So for me, right,
Mm.
I believe in, if I was to simplify it, I believe in suffering now and enjoying later. So I imagine, and I
Mm.
don't necessarily mean in retirement. That's too far. I mean in the
No, no,
next
no, no, no. Please,
10,
please, I beg.
yeah, no, no, no. In the next 10 to 15 years, I'm 28 now. So I'm thinking in
Mm.
the next 10 to
Mm.
15 years, at that point of time, but before then, I would be building
Mm.
something. I'd be sacrificing, maybe not necessarily buying the most expensive things, but building to a point where when
Mm.
I'm there, and because you was with me, yo, girl, we're taking sunsets.
Mm.
We don't own a yacht, but we're on a yacht, taking sunsets, having having sundowners on
You're
sunset.
not answering.
No, no,
You are
no,
not on.
no, no. What
I'm just on a pint of.
no, 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 no. So I am answering. What I'm saying is, I believe
Mm.
that you need to take care of your woman. I believe that a man should take care of your woman. And there's something I don't know if it was you, but there
Mm.
was something that somebody said to me recently. They were like, the reason why they believe that a woman should be taken care of by a man is because women are already at a disposition from the moment they're born. If you're in a tradition, so this is not if you're in a traditional
Mm.
relationship. So if you're in a
Mm.
traditional relationship and you're married or dating someone who's a progressive woman in terms of um, being in the being in the workforce, she's employed, she has a career that she's building towards, maybe she has a dream of building owning her own business, etc. Already, when
Mm.
she's in those environments, she's getting paid less than her male counterparts. Already, she's not necessarily getting the same opportunities as her male counterparts. Already, maybe her career is already building, because she's married to you and you want kids, she has to take time out of building her career to
Mm.
give birth to your children, to both your children, but just in
Mm.
the context, to give birth to your children, take time off already, because remember, the world progresses regardless. So by the time she gets back into the
Mm.
workforce, a full swing, technology could have changed. Icarus could
Mm.
have had a new code. How things are done has already changed. So now she's already lost that gap of knowledge of being able to now compete with people where
Mm.
she was already competing unfairly with already prior to that. So someone explained to me that, okay, I have to go through all of these things, still come home and cook for you, still come home and nurture, still do all of these things, and you're not willing to pay for the honey.
Mm.
And I was like, that's a
Mm.
good point. I've never
It's
thought
so
about it like that.
fascinating.
Yeah, I've never thought
Neither
about it
did
like that.
I actually.
And I said, that's a
So
really good point.
it is a really good point, but I also want to be careful not to denigrate the ability and potential of women as well.
Yes.
When I say spoil and take care of me, I'm not saying, and this is also another thing, like I've also challenged the salary gap, and I'll ask my male counterparts, like, oh yeah, what are you charging? I need to know that. Um, so we're on a level field, but let me just, let me not go, yeah, let me not digress. With taking care of a woman, I think it's important to also appreciate that women are positive assets. There's something called appreciative inquiry, right? And it's the ability to leverage what you have to increase magnified impact. So when I say take care of me, you are investing in me.
Hundred percent.
You're taking on an investment. You are not taking on a responsibility. When I'm saying invest in me, you're investing in me to invest in us. And this is why it's also important that it be in the context, of course, of a relationship or something solid, where there is potential for growth and mutual benefit as well. I'm not talking board chumiares and no, 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 not those girls. And definitely not in that context. But I'm saying if you are in the context of something serious, oh yeah, you need to put money so I can make money out of money, because zeros produce zeros. And it's the thing is, even a part of my explanation will sound a bit irrational, right? And there's only so much rationality I can bring into it, other than I grew up in West Africa, and it's like it's all I've ever known. But I've also seen the beauty of being able to leverage an amount of patriarchy to advance society as well. So before I even go further, right now, I know that you've put forward a 15 to 20-year thing where you're like, no, it's all about sacrificing now. Right now, would you spray a little in your girlfriend's purse?
Yeah, absolutely. So I digressed a little bit, but I thought it was important to mention that part, but I did digress a
No,
bit.
it is important for
Yeah,
foundation purposes,
yeah.
absolutely.
So no, you're right. So I think what I got wrong, and it's still something I'm fixing, is that I've always thought that if I really invest in me, I'm able to provide for us, which is not wrong.
Mm.
Which is not wrong, but
No, at all.
yeah,
At
but
all.
I think in the context of a relationship and a marriage, what you have to begin to understand as the male counterpart, or let me say in my specific context as well, you can build yourself up, but the problem is there's also that thing is when you're with someone you have to grow together, right? So if you're busy growing
Mm.
yourself and investing yourself and growing yourself, it's kind of like this. She's hanging
Mm.
on whilst you're
Mm.
going up, instead of both of you being on the
Mm.
pedestal and the pedestal rising up. So I've it's taken me some time. So now I look at what more can I do that's different. Is it
Mm.
extra? Is it more flowers? Is it
Mm.
the date nights? How we
And
do
remember,
it? It's
and
it.
it's so interesting
Mm,
because even when I mention money, the word money is so loaded because it doesn't mean economic capital alone. It
100%.
means intellectual and social capital. Are you introducing her to the relevant spaces? What are her ambitions? What is her stakeholder hit list? Every time I go, so I used to do this in Cyprus, and I know, please don't judge me, right?
No,
So
no.
when I was in Cyprus and I'd go on dates, and I saw this a lot with my Nigerian friends, but I knew this even prior. I charge a deposit, my dear. If we're going on a date, don't waste my time, and that created a beautiful funnel for me because I knew that any man that wants to see me, he was putting down that it wasn't even much, man. It was probably like $100. It wasn't that deep. That just the effort
Wait,
to
just
be
for the
able
sake
to
of South
put down.
Africans, just sorry to interrupt. Just for the sake of context for South Africans to understand, because $100 is a lot, but in the context
No,
of in
no.
being where you were, 'cause like my mom always, because there's that show called Selling Sunset, so I always ask my mom, I'm like, bloody hell, these houses are so expensive, and then she keeps telling me do this because you keep thinking in rands. Yeah. So just for the sake of the viewers, don't think in rands when she says that. Sorry, yeah.
No, not at all. Okay, so there's something called the purchasing power parity,
Correct.
and it's the thing. $100 in the US or in an EU country is completely different to what $100 might mean in South Africa. So $100, that's right. It isn't much, right? But it really says not necessarily you're not wasting my time, but that in that hour I'd wasted with you, I could potentially put it to good use, sort of thing. But
Yeah.
it also creates a great funnel for men not to waste my time as well. But that was $100 in like 2014. So I haven't been
Yeah.
on like real dates since. But anyway, now I lost my train of thought. Okay, so I was talking about the forms of capital, right? The economic, the social, and the intellectual forward slash cultural capital is that $100 is as much as it means whatever it means in monetary terms. It also means the potential exploration into social capital. So when I meet you for when we go on a date and whatever, I'm not going on a date because I'm trying to live my best life, right?
Mm,
We're also going on dates because we are trying to settle down or we're trying to grow with this
that's
particular
purpose.
individual. Absolutely. And when I let you know what my ambitions are, it's also for me to gauge how much of your social capital I can leverage, or even how much of your personal development I can leverage as well to advance myself. We're human beings, and I think this whole notion that we're not transactional is so bizarre. We're very transactional human beings, but there is beauty in that transparency as well. One, and there is beauty in that transaction being mutually beneficial is not just at an economic level, but to say, how can you advance me in order for me to advance you, and vice versa. Even if
Mm,
I'm a woman and I find that this man is not doing as well as I am, because the truth is, And it's so weird because I'm in a position where when I was growing up, I was all about being treated like a princess, and I still am. But I've had to realize that a lot of the men that I'm going to attract now, so for example, in the ICT sector, those men, a lot of those men are like over 45. What's my business with men who are that old? You know, there was nothing, I can't, there's like no hope for me in the ICT sector. But I've also realized that sometimes, or a lot of the time, my salary bracket is going to be higher than some of the men that I attract. And I must be okay with that. Um, but I also must be comfortable with being able to leverage another kind of capital. So it might not be economic capital because I'm making money, I'm okay, you know, but social capital, intellectual capital, psychological capital. You know, this man might be a supportive man. This man might be a man who will bathe the kids, take care of the kids, cook when I come back from work, you know. And there's beauty in that as well. Is when I talk money, I'm only talking resources. And this is why it's so important that this conversation be a conversation that we have with critical thinkers. So when they think money, they're not just thinking like cash money. They're thinking resources. Resources as well.
No, I believe in that. I don't think I'm the best mascot or representative for the club. I don't think I've done it well, but I'm beginning to at my age, at 28 now. Some of the things I'm debunking some of the things that I had before, like some of the beliefs that I had, from religion to love to spirituality to my mental health. There's a lot of things that I'm now starting to understand and look at them at a different perspective, and it's that too. I someone if someone was to actually analyze me, because I look at myself, but if I was to look at myself in the mirror and say, how have I changed in terms of what I think I should be doing better or more, I've started to pick up a few of those small nuggets to be like, okay, I can't expect someone, my girlfriend or listeners says, you can't be dating, you can't be marrying potential. It's and you, I mean, you can, but what she means by that is I need to understand it tangibly. And I don't mean that by give me money or buy me this or buy me that. It's in the actions that you do, in how you treat me as a lover. Those specific things is very important, because you have to be able to imagine. Because being married to somebody, or not necessarily being married, because I don't want people to say, but yeah, it's a constitution, it's a social construct. Yeah, but I mean, being with someone, having a life together with somebody, is so perplex, or rather, it's complex. It's very complex. It's not just
100%.
we get married, buy a house, and that's it. Oh my gosh, it is so much deeper than that. So you need to also, when you choose a life partner, you really have to be able to somewhat see, all right, even though I can't see everything right now, the things that are important to me and what I believe will be important to me moving forward, we can now take those things where we can understand what they are, and vice versa. So
and you also need like a healthy level of troubled relationships as well. You need that annoying partner who, man, who'll just annoy the hell out of you, but annoy you towards a better place.
Yeah.
There's beauty in that. I hate this whole concept that, oh my gosh, no, I don't want it to be dramatic. We are dramatic women. It's part of our spec. We're women, we're going to bring drama.
It's who you are. And that's okay. That's
very
beauty.
fiery.
People see fire in two ways. They see it as danger, and then they see it as beautiful amber.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's such a conversation. I still feel like we haven't touched on some other stuff, but that's fine. See, I did tell you. This conversation cannot be constrained to an hour.
No, it can't. It's super, but but we do have to go. But like, I knew when I started the show, I just said, man, an hour. First and foremost, so I have another show on Wednesdays, generally called Banterville. So that one was initially 30 minutes.
Okay.
First episode went like 40, 50 minutes, and I was just like,
yeah, 30 minutes is not gonna work. It's not gonna work at all. It's not gonna work at all.
So like, the reason I try to host these conversations, and whom I find interesting as well, is because people don't get to hear these conversations enough, and we don't tend to have them enough generally. And even when we go to braais and stuff, it's always just so like, hey, did you see the weather? Yeah, how are things? Cool.
And it's so interesting because I think this is the first conversation we've really had.
True,
When
true.
we spoke, so like the first time we ever spoke, we were at the Pink Golf Challenge, and I was speaking to your friend at the time. Well, I'm assuming you call your friend, and then
Yeah.
you were sort of like on the peripheries, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure what kind of person you were, and he kept telling me like, "No, man, that was like such an amazing guy, man. He's super humble, man. He's just like so amazing." And you were so quiet at the time, just like living your best life, playing golf there. So we've really never had a real conversation. So I really, really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. I didn't expand on what you asked me about just by my general advice, like having traveled
Yeah, please.
and lived in Africa and stuff. So I don't have anything deep or philosophical to say other than it's so important to have additional streams of income. I've noticed South Africans just don't understand that concept. It's a 9 to 5 and that is that. And I don't get that. So I'm so used to working around the clock and on 17, 18 hours a day shift. When I mean shift, I mean working
Yeah,
hours, right?
yeah.
Um, I've also never understood why South Africans have a problem. So I don't get that. So you're unemployed. Let's just say you lose your job, right? You move away from an office job and you're not willing to engage in any menial jobs because no, that goes against the status quo. I don't get that because when I was in Cyprus, for example, even though I was head of marketing Africa for higher education, I still had pretty menial-ish jobs. Still walk the dogs, take care of pets. I think at one time I also worked in a furniture store, and it didn't take away from who I was. I was on full scholarship at the time, so there was really no reason to.
Mm,
My friend at the time, who's now Afyong is at the Halt International Business School, so she's at Halt International in Dubai, and even though she comes from a really well-off family, she cooked her way to Dubai to pay for a master's degree for her MBA, excuse
yeah.
me. And she was cooking jollof rice like normal level. So just acquiring additional sources of income, not being ashamed of where their source of income come from, even though they might denigrate your existing status quo, for as long as it's legal, my dear, make your money and go. You know,
Mm,
um, yeah, that's really important. Three, understand that we live in a global ecosystem, and unfortunately, we're in a time where your race, your nationality doesn't matter anymore. Competence is the most important. Gone are the days where you being a South African is going to count. The whole no, but I'm a local. No, but the government must. Guys, those days are gone. Those millionaire shortbread and coffee days are gone. People are coming in, people are offering value, and if you can't offer value, regardless of who you are, African black, South African black women, it's not going to work. That whole tag is no longer going to work, particularly because it's Women's Month as well. As much as it's so important to appreciate how far women have come, we need to be able to transcend that narrative as well. Your ability to provide value is the most important thing. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. So yeah, those are just my little thought nuggets. It's not even deep. It's just, man, just go get yourself a bloody job. We're in the midst of a pandemic. If Woolies goes in and says, listen, I'm blackity bloody, I wouldn't mind, to be honest. I don't, it's a pity I don't have much time in South Africa because I'm going back to Cyprus, but I would love to have a challenge, man, and like just go into Woolies and be a cashier for like 3 weeks. Like I really wouldn't mind. I think I'd have the time of my life. I
mm,
really wouldn't mind. But just use that as a case study to really show you how important it is to be flexible, and that when the money talk comes in, it doesn't matter who the hell you are, what you stand for, go in and work. Go in and work. That's a typical migrant story. People started off being cashiers and worked their way into Harvard. And
mm.
it's weird. We're not huh? Got busy there.
But
Oh.
so I'm not going to say that South Africans don't do it. They definitely do. But I think what I've seen a lot about our African counterparts, especially from the West, You know,
Mhm.
I see them really specializing in skill sets and pushing boundaries
Mm.
to make it globally. Now, my message
Mm.
isn't go get the skill sets and then leave South Africa, because I think maybe that's also where the issue with Africa comes, because we have
Yeah,
people
so
who gain skill sets and don't come
absolutely.
back to build. Not
Yo.
obviously it's not that easy, but I'm just saying that people don't really, on
Yeah.
average.
And I'm so sad, like we didn't get to touch on that. So that's called brain drain, right? When you find intellectual capital being better leveraged in Europe, and then people leave and they never come back.
Mm,
And that one leads to brain drain, and two, it's people find it very difficult to reinvest that social capital and that intellectual capital as well. And a lot of my work, like with skills development programs in the diaspora, focus a lot on trying to replow that investment back into Africa, not so much physically, but through digital mentorship. Um, but you know what I also noticed? Like it's so weird now because there's this obsession with going overseas, but people suffer overseas.
mm.
People are fighting for like £2,000 salaries a month, and I'm like, remember though, this is the
British power
purchasing power
parity.
parity. So I understand the £2,000 in South Africa is like balling out of control, but think of £2,000 as almost like maybe 15,000 in South Africa. Yeah, 15-ish. It really, really isn't much, considering that you've got to send some funds back home, got to fund your education, you've got to fund your apartment. I mean, apartments in London,
Ooh.
having a bedroom in a 3-bedroom apartment, that's an odd £900,000 right there and there. So I would love for us to also revisit the misconception that going overseas is a passport to success, or that it classifies you in a position higher than the average African. There's the ability of being a global citizen without even traveling. And the pandemic has really underpinned that in a blessed, yeah, in a two-edged sword in that regard, but it's also being a blessing to know that you don't have to travel to become a global citizen. I hate the narrative of going overseas because people stop. I mean, now we get students who wouldn't even have funds for food. They'd have just enough to fly and get accommodation and pay for their fees. And then as soon as they get there, it's like there was nothing else they could live on.
Mm.
So there's also beauty in being back in Africa. So much beauty, and also because we're a developing country, so there's so much to be leveraged in Africa, particularly like entrepreneurship and just the 4IR space as well.
Mm, mm.
So yeah, that's just my last thought. Like, I don't think you're going overseas because you're going to make it. People have already made it there.
Yeah.
Make it in Africa. Create sustainable impact here at home, because that's where it matters.
Stamp
That's where it
yourself on the
really matters.
legacy of our story. Because our story has only just begun.
It really has just begun. We're only learning now to document our own story.
Mm.
And there's so much beauty in that. So much beauty in that as well.
100%.
So yeah.
My friend, let's call it quits for the night. I think you and I could go hours, ring to ring, glove to glove. Thank you so much for your time. I knew this was going to be a very intriguing and intellectual conversation. And I really hope that anyone who's tuned in really either want to debate or really have just like got some value from it. Because I think another thing that, as you said, you need to be able to speak to critical thinkers, because there's nothing wrong with somebody after this calling me and saying, I disagree with everything you guys said.
Absolutely. And I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with them as well.
100%. And then all we do, there's not a fight. It's just, okay, let's break it down, and let's talk from a place of respect, and then we just see and we can agree to disagree at the end of the day. That's fine. But let's just engage. And that's what we need to do more.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much beauty in diverse thought processes. So I'd love to hear what people have to say as well. There's a lot for me to learn as well. So absolutely. I mean, I should really thank you and commend you for creating this platform, particularly within a Pan-African context as well. Because man, I'm all for critical thinking, but I'm all for critical thinking that can be contextualized to the African narrative as well. And it's such a journey, such a learning journey for all of us. So I look forward, I really look forward to seeing what this will lead to with you, and the amazing space that you're doing, both in the content and the music and artistic space as well. So all the best.
Thank you
All
so
the
much.
best, all the best, all the best.
Thank you
All
so
the
much.
best.
All right. Now, have a good evening. Take care of yourself. And then, yeah, let's keep in touch.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Noah. Take care.
Thank you so much.